It's no secret that the job market is a mess. Over half of recent graduates are working in jobs that don't require a degree at all, and this is only set to get worse, as AI is promising to replace a quarter of the few remaining jobs available within the next 5 years. But at the same time, a career path once thought to be dead is quietly becoming more and more lucrative: blue-collar jobs. In fact, an average elevator installer can expect to earn upwards of $100,000 a year, more than double what a graduate going into an entry-level consulting firm could expect to earn. And this gap is only getting bigger, as blue-collar wages are growing by nearly double the national average. Of course, this isn't exactly a secret. Watch the news and you'll probably hear the same story over again. Blue-collar jobs are back because America slapped taxes on imported goods, and suddenly factories started opening up again. And on the surface, it seems to make sense. If you make it more expensive to import something, companies will have more reason to make it domestically instead. The only problem is that's not the whole story, because while tariffs and trade wars might play a role, the real reason blue-collar jobs are returning has less to do with Washington and more to do with what's happening on the other side of the world. Realistically, there are much deeper factors causing the shift, just ones that the media are less open to talking about.
Gen Z's pivot from college to blue-collar jobs.
It's over 2 million workers are needed by the year 2030. There's a cost of over $1 trillion to the GDP if we don't solve that.
Blue-collar comeback, because ChatGPT can't do jobs like fixing your plumbing or wiring your home.
So here's why blue-collar jobs are becoming the new stable career path for Gen Z workers. What really made blue-collar jobs disappear in America and what's making them come back might seem simple, but there's actually a lot more going on. At its core, jobs are just an economic transaction. Specifically, if a worker can generate more value for a company than what it costs to pay them, they get hired, and if not, they don't. But that also means where the job exists has less to do with the worker and more to do with the math. If someone in Guangzhou can do the same job for $5 an hour instead of $25 in Ohio, then companies will choose to relocate. And as you probably know, that's exactly what happened 50 years ago. As China opened up its economy in the late 20th century, it rapidly industrialized, and cheap labor, massive state investment in infrastructure, and favorable trade policies made it the world's factory. So when US companies saw an opportunity to slash their production costs by moving operations to China, they took it. That's the China theory in a nutshell. America didn't lose its jobs, it just exported them. And for the last decade or so, the US has been locked in a trade war with China aimed at reversing that shift, trying to bring blue-collar work back home. So it makes sense to assume that that's why these jobs are starting to return. Tariffs, reshoring incentives, and political pressure are all part of a broader effort to undo decades of offshoring. Pretty straightforward, right? Well, it's actually incorrect. It's simple enough to write the whole thing off as a downstream effect of a political decision. While that's definitely part of what's going on, there's a lot more to it than that. Because while blue-collar job work has been on the rise, another kind of career has been slowly stalling out: white-collar jobs. And that's the first sign that something weird is going on. For decades, an office job was the aspirational career trajectory for the average American. Get decent grades in school, go to college and get a good degree, and then you can find yourself an office job where you could work 50 years and then retire. That might all sound a bit depressing, but hundreds of millions of people decided to go to college anyway, and this really came down to one reason: it was a great investment. Back in the early 2000s, the earning premium for a college degree was massive. College graduates earned about 75% more on average than those with only a high school diploma. Over the course of a working lifetime, this difference added up to well over $1 million, a pretty great investment considering a degree at the time cost $20,000 to $30,000. Of course, with everybody training to become consultants and engineers, there wasn't that many people left wanting to go to trade school, and so the proportion of people working blue-collar jobs slowly declined. This of course came with its issues. Put simply, even the most advanced economy probably needs plumbers more than it does management consultants. But there was a much deeper problem, and it all came down to the simple fact that degrees were fundamentally different from the other kinds of investments. It wasn't like owning a farm or even shares in a company, where the asset could generate value passively. Instead, its worth came almost entirely from employers' perception of it. A degree signaled to companies that you were smart, disciplined, and could follow instructions well enough to survive 4 years of higher education. Basically, it was worth the money if it helped you get a better job after graduating. And that's exactly where the problems in this model start to arise, because the more people who have a degree, the less valuable they become. After all, once everyone has one, it stops being a signal of quality and instead just becomes a minimum requirement to get a job. And that's exactly what happened for the last 40 years. The proportion of US workers with college degrees rose from about 25% in 1990 to nearly 42% by 2023. To actually get return of investment that bachelor's degrees used to get, you need to get a master's or now even a PhD. But all of these come with extra tuition, extra years out of the workforce, and extra hundreds of thousands of dollars in opportunity cost. The point is, for millions of people, it's become too expensive with too small of a financial reward. And the alternative? Going to trade school. That's exactly what people are choosing to do. Employment in vocational training programs surged by 16% between 2022 and 2023, while traditional 4-year college enrollment stayed basically flat. Applications for trade-related apprenticeships are also at record highs, rising faster than at any time in the past 2 decades. Now, part of this shift is simply because college has become a terrible financial investment to most people, but there is a little more to it than that. The median wage for skilled trades like electricians and plumbers now sits well above $60,000 a year, with the top 10% earning more than $100,000. And in most regions, that outpaces what many college grads earn in their first 5 years out of school. And most crucially, most of these roles don't come with student debt attached. This is already starting to shift the behaviour of young people. The share of Gen Z in blue-collar work is already far higher than that of previous generations, and it's rising quickly. Of course, this raises the obvious question: why are blue-collar jobs suddenly getting paid so well? After all, normally in times of technological change, it's the people at the top of the pyramid who gain the most. Why would this time be any different? The answer actually comes down to an aspect of global trade, just not probably in the way that you expect. When economies develop, they tend to go through a few different stages. This pattern is so consistent that economists literally have a name for it: structural transformation. Today, China is entering the final phase of this development, shifting away from manufacturing and towards services, and that means a lot more competition for white-collar jobs. Not just call centres and tech support, but things like design, engineering, consulting, and finance. A college graduate in Shanghai can do effectively the same work as a US grad, but for a third of the salary. So companies are simply choosing to relocate. It's exactly the same as what happened to blue-collar jobs just a few decades earlier, but this time with skilled professionals. In a weird twist of fate, this shift is also freeing up the old jobs that American workers used to do in the 1980s, because factories in China aren't as cheap as they used to be. Labour costs have risen sharply, and regulations have gotten stricter. Add to that geopolitical tensions, and outsourcing has been a bit riskier than it once was, so companies are starting to rethink their supply chains. And at a time when a whole generation of young people are waiting to go into blue-collar roles, America looks like an increasingly attractive option. Now, this doesn't mean Detroit is about to become the car capital of the world again, but it does mean that some old industries are starting to show signs of life. Manufacturing employment in the US has grown by over 800,000 jobs since 2010, with a notable uptick in the last few years as reshoring efforts accelerated. And sectors like construction, logistics, and skilled trades are projected to see some of the fastest growth through the end of the decade. In fact, jobs for electricians, plumbers, and HVAC technicians are now growing faster than the average for all occupations, and often come with salaries that rival or even exceed many entry-level office jobs. It's not a total reversal of the past, but it is a sign that the future of work might end up looking a little more like the past than most people expected. So no, this shift isn't just the result of one trade war or a few government policies. It's the outcome of long-term changes, both in the global economy and in how people think about work. White-collar jobs used to be the obvious goal. They offered stability, status, and generally better pay packets, but the cost of getting there has risen. The value of degrees has fallen, and the jobs themselves just aren't as secure or rewarding as they once were. At the same time, blue-collar work, the kind that had been quietly declining for decades, is starting to come back. Not because it's suddenly fashionable, but because it makes economic sense again. As global labour costs shift, and as more young people question the value of a traditional college path, trades and vocational work are becoming a more practical, affordable alternative.